This is Modern World History Standard 1.5, explaining how the development of banks in Europe influenced the transfer of goods throughout Europe. Just to go back over some of the things we've already learned in the other standards, we know that the feudalistic societies failed or collapsed because of the Crusades that were fostered by the Catholic Church. Militarily, they had failed over the 200 years, but what came out of that, as we already know, is massive trade routes through the sea and land, and ideas into Europe that had not been there throughout the Middle Ages. Now, this reduced the power of the Catholic Church. We know it reduced the power of the knights, most of them dying in the fighting, and then, of course, the nobles, reduced their power. So what we have here is a brand new financial institution, mercantilism and trade. So we want to go into banks here and how important they were, financial institutions, in getting these goods around Europe. One thing I want to reflect on is to keep in mind as we looked at that scale of from kings down to serfs. One thing I don't want us to forget about are the serfs, and how the serfs would be able to move up, getting off the land of the manor, and to find a skill and to be a part of this new economic society. Now, looking at right here, this picture, we see some pretty interesting things. One would be the two gentlemen here doing some trading here, buying and selling. And then here I see these gentlemen doing like a market exchange, a currency exchange. Trying to, maybe this gentleman here had bought or been selling somewhere maybe in Italy and had currency and was doing some exchange there with the other gentleman. So that's a form of financing or banking that we're going to look at in this section. This next slide has to do with 5 terms that will be the foundation of the commercial revolution after the collapse of feudalism. We want to look at these terms here and how they are going to affect the growth of the economy within Europe. Now, the first one, I want to connect a couple of them. The Fugger family would be what we call today venture capitalists. They would put up massive amounts of money, gold, for entrepreneurs to invest in ships and crews to go to places like India and China, get their products, return back to sell in Italy, and then to ship out to Europe. Mr. Fugger, on the other hand, he would only want one thing in return, and it's the same thing that joint stock companies are going to want. Okay, he wants interest on his money. Now, I want to kind of connect joint stock companies with the Fugger family. So joint stock companies, as you see right here, we have a nice, old picture of a stock certificate. That's an example of people coming together with their money and pooling it together to buy into companies that would do the same thing as I described earlier, related to trade. So they also are looking for money or interest on their investment. Another one is the charter banks. Okay, the banking system was very important. The establishment of the banking system. One is, remember, the serfs coming off the manor system, needing new types of jobs. This would be a job that they would have. You could become a bookkeeper in a bank, maybe work your way up in the banking institution. And then joint stock companies or wealthy individuals like the Fugger family would do their business here in these banks, writing up contracts and stuff for their investments. Also, the economy as far as buying and selling, borrowing money, and paying back that money all happen within the banks. And here I have also a picture. Look at stock exchange, picture of old stock exchange here, And as I explained earlier, people would buy stock certificates, put their money into companies, and the companies would use the money to buy ships and those types of things. So, and the last thing here, insurance companies, Lloyd's of London. And that's a picture right here. Lloyd's of London, very important, because as you're taking a risk and trying to make money, sending these ships off into to India or China, some bad things can happen. Raiders, pirates can capture their the cargo, or rough seas or a storm could destroy the ships. So Lloyd's of London would insure these ventures, so they would the investors, like stockholders or the Fugger family or whatever, they would not lose their money. So Lloyd's of London would be very important. So insurance companies are established during this time period. Everything that we have today, from investment capitalists to charter banks to stock exchanges, this whole realm here, insurance companies, all were developed during the commercial revolution of the Renaissance and are still with us today. In this next slide, I want to show you two parts of the commercial revolution. The first one would be this Italian florin coin here. Often I have used the term and drawn the sign of a dollar sign, but we're looking at money here, and paper money and that type of currency was not used. They may have a written agreement or a stock certificate. We've looked at that, but it's got to be backed up by something of value. And of course, this is a gold coin, which would help finance many of the trade ventures of the time. Also, in the commercial revolution, they say, despite the setback of the plague, the plague happened as trade went or increased. That's when the plague happened. But despite that, the resurgence of trade continued in Europe, and many innovations in business. One of them would be the double bookkeeping entry. So we look right here, and we see these bookkeepers, okay? And double entry meaning they would put their debts on one side, okay, and credits on another, same way we do today. Okay, and so money was you look and see how much money that you've borrowed and for investment, and then as that money came in and you sold the products, you'd have credits, and then you'd pay back that money. So double entry bookkeeping system became very important, and there again gave the serfs some type of job that they could do in this new commercial revolution. Okay, in this slide we're looking at, or continuing here with the development of banks in Europe and transfer of goods, looking at this brand new economy. And as we look at the finance side of Europe, okay, so we're talking about the money side of it, and then we look at the trade side of it, we got to remember, and we cannot forget about labor, all right? The word guild means to pay, which comes from Saxon language, refers to the payment to the members. Now these were also very important as we come up here. They were trade associations of craft workers and merchants. Now we're talking about different types of workers: wheelwrights, glass makers, wine makers, tailors, druggists, are some of the workers that would join guilds. All of one guild would form together to set standards of price and quality. So a certain price that they wanted to sell their goods, and what type of quality would be required to keep the standard to have the price.
Guilds dominated economic life during this period and were the main mode of production. So as we look later, when we talk about banks, okay, and finances, it's going to be very important. If their mode of production, their price, the quality, the trade isn't going to be very good unless these guilds produce the products that can be traded around the world, and they're going to bring a good price. Okay. Now, as we go to here and we look at the picture, we have a guild of people sitting around a table, and they're just sitting here discussing, I'm sure, price, quality, how their businesses are doing, possibly the workers that work in their shops, and how the trade is going to continue to flow as far as modes of production. Very important at this point as we go back and we look at our objective: transfer of goods, banks in Europe. So trading and banking, you can't have that without labor. So as we look at this and we talk about the word guild, I would say this in class, but we're looking at what? Today, it'd be unions. All right? And that's very important, kind of the early form here of unionization in the Renaissance.
As we look at this slide, we want to continue looking at the development of banking and the influence of transfer of goods through Europe. But this transfer of goods through Europe cannot happen without some innovations. For example, here we're looking at the hourglass and how time became extremely important. It says here skipping a flip that they would do on the ship, profound impacts on work schedules and navigational calculations, and getting these products from the east, okay, back to Italy and then Europe. And you see the trade routes here, either Northern Europe or going around Spain, and what's happening in the Mediterranean, etc., etc. So the hourglass is just one invention that was important during this time period. In the next two slides that ends this 1.5 Modern World History Standard, I have bold printed some words in here, and we have some main themes here about trade routes and expectations. And nations sought sources of wealth and new economic theories to practice to deal with the newfound wealth, and the nations desired increased world power through their colonial powers. And when we look at that, or empires, we'll look at that a little bit later. But mercantilism, you need to understand these vocabulary words and to memorize these vocabulary words as we continue here. All right, mercantilism, and then bullionism, capitalism. All right, and then we talked about the emergence of the new banking system. We had a whole slide on that. And then domestic. What was the domestic system? How did the family change, increase specialization and skills in the workplace, etc., etc. So that's going to be quite important. So you study this sheet along with the next slide, and I'm going to go to it right now, and we can look at it. Some of these things here, this is the age of the European discovery. You can look at some of the things here you need to study. But I have bold printed a few things here. Inflation, price revolution, or the increase of prices. That would be a term that would be important during commercialization. We look at inflation today, how much things cost and how they've gone up. How many times I've heard that a Coke used to cost 5 cents. Well, it doesn't cost 5 cents anymore, so inflation is a part of our life today. Another thing, a shift of old market ports in the Mediterranean to the transatlantic trade. Okay, so as we look at maps, we're going to go away from the trade will continue in the Mediterranean, all right, but we're going to look at transatlantic trade. All right, new trade restrictions. So royal monopolies. Monopoly meaning one company controls an entire industry, and in this case, shipping. So we'll look at the word monopoly, all right, and then the African slave trade and the triangular trade, and the changes in social structure and how that's going to affect the Americas and Europe. So you need to study all these terms that I have kind of highlighted in the two sheets, look them up, study them, and be prepared to answer them on a test or a quiz.